So in this segment, we're going to be discussing Starmer throwing trans people under the bus, hiding behind a court ruling, even though the government can change laws and definitions. And if they wanted to, they could get around a court ruling easily. Governments have done it in the past. There's no scandal here if the government decided to do that and actually back trans people. A voter base they are reliant on, by the way, not to win, but probably in key marginal seats. Also, a community they try to pander to a lot as well.
We saw protests this weekend in Bristol, as Paul mentioned, about the Supreme Court ruling. Do you believe a trans woman is a woman?
Look, I think the Supreme Court has answered that question.
So you don't believe a trans woman is a woman?
Look, a woman is an adult female, and the court has made that absolutely clear. I actually welcome the judgment because I think it gives
me a chance to hide behind something, and so I don't have to keep answering this question.
Real clarity. It allows those that have got to draw up guidance to be really clear about what that guidance should say. So I think it's important that we see the judgment for what it is. It's a welcome step forward. It's real clarity in an area where we did need clarity. I'm pleased it's come about. We need to move and make sure that we now ensure that all guidance is in the right place according to that judgment.
What are your words for the trans community who are worried about what this could mean for them?
Well, look, I think it is important that we have clarity about the law. That's what the Supreme Court is there for. So obviously that's an important and welcome step.
So if you're worried about the rule change, don't worry, you have clarity. So don't fear, there's clarity here, I guess.
And we go forward from there.
That is a comically bad interview. You've got this clip here, Starmer talking about the situation previously. The audio is a bit iffy, but it will do.
There's abuse of vilification and violence against trans people on a daily basis. I think the way the media are dealing with this is completely wrong, and it resonates almost with the old Section 28 debate. Same argument, same challenging, same characterisation, same stereotyping, if you like. And in years to come, we will look back at this period and say that the way this issue was dealt with was completely wrong.
Damn, he's not wrong, though, in this clip. Because I think in the future we are going to look at it like this.
As we look back now, Section 28, and know that that was completely wrong. Trans rights are human rights, and I support the right to self-identification.
I don't think you do, buddy.
Just as we stood up against Section 28, we've also got to stand up here for trans rights and take that fight on.
As soon as the court says no, you say no, right? And it gets worse. Bridget Phillipson here in this interview saying toilet use based on biological sex, says minister. But the problem is, right, you're in a situation people are going to freak out because you're going to have people who are transitioning into becoming women going into the men's changing room, which will cause anyone to freak out. I think I'd be like, what the hell's going on here? But it'd be the other way around as well. Like, or it's a bit confusing to explain. I'm not too clued in on trans issues, but you're gonna have people transitioning to the opposite gender going into the change room, the wrong one, effectively. The one that they that's going to cause an issue. Like, why would you have, like, I think some things that these TERFs don't understand is, like, some of you look more like dudes than trans women, and so, like, you're gonna get gender checked a lot more now, especially if you cause an argument in certain areas. You're going to get gender checked in places like changing rooms, for example. Like, you don't understand the danger you put yourselves in, especially the ones who are a bit more muscly, or the ones who are very flat. You're going to cause massive issues for yourselves here.
Does the government accept the outcome? Does it accept the ruling that the Supreme Court has delivered?
Yes, we do, and subject to the usual processes, I intend to update Parliament and give MPs the chance to discuss this matter. We do recognise and welcome the clarity that the Supreme Court has delivered through the judgment.
Notice how they use the same words, because it's all like drilled into that. They have to use specific phrases.
That single-sex spaces are to be delivered on the basis of biological sex. Before I was an MP, I managed a women's refuge, so I know more than most how important it is that women, especially those who have experienced male violence, sexual violence and trauma, are able to access safe therapeutic spaces, and alongside that we make sure that everyone in our society is treated with dignity and respect. And that was...
But you're not treating people with dignity and respect because you're going to refuse trans women from these spaces. So how are you treating them with dignity and respect?
Also an important aspect of what the Supreme Court had to say.
Is there unity among the government and among the wider Labour Party about this? Because obviously it is a very divisive topic in society, and that there's been suggestions that there are very differing opinions within the party about how to take this forward.
Yes, there is, and I speak for the government on this matter, and I can be crystal clear with you that we welcome the ruling. We will make sure that the EHRC work with us to bring forward guidance to address those areas.
You mean you will work with the ECHC, right? You will work with the court, not the court will work, like you can't demand anything from the European Court of Human Rights. Like, that's not how it goes.
Where through both the guidance and the statutory code of practice, providers have that further clarity that is needed. But I think, women's refuges, rape crisis centres and others can now be confident as to how they deliver services, those provisions.
So do you think people aren't going to get gender checked at these places? You don't think you would add to their trauma by, all you need is some woman who's there saying, oh, I think you're a man, and you realise it's going to cause all sorts of issues, right?
Were always there within the Equality Act, but the Supreme Court has set that beyond doubt.
What about questions that come up quite regularly but are important basic questions? Now we've had that ruling. If a trans woman is out in public today and wants to use the toilet, which toilet should they use?
That should be on the basis of biological sex. That would apply right across the board to all single-sex provision. But the EHRC will be setting out additional guidance and a statutory code of practice, because we need to make sure that everyone has the ability to access services that are safe and appropriate and respect their privacy and dignity. So the Supreme Court was clear about the importance of biological women having access to those spaces. But of course, where it comes to provisions such as changing facilities, hospital facilities and others, there needs to be appropriate and available services there for all people, including trans people. And that's why the guidance and the code of practice that the EHRC will set out will be important in this area, and we hope that they can do so as quickly as possible.
And just for clarity, because it is an important point, and as you say, that guidance is being rushed through, but it's not here yet. If you are a trans woman and you're out in public, you need to use the toilet today, it is the men's toilet that you use.
See, this is the kind of follow-up questions we need more of, because, she's trying to skirt around the question.
The ruling was clear that
Here we go.
provision and services should be accessed on the basis of biological sex. But I
So in non-legal speak,
know that many businesses, large and small, will ensure that they have appropriate provision in place. For example, many businesses have moved towards unisex provision or separate.
not that many. Really, not that many at all. To be honest with you, have unisex toilets. That's not true at all.
Cubicles that can be used by anyone, where
If that isn't,
That's predominantly the disabled toilet that would be able to be used by anyone.
not be
just
sharing
yet.
those. Well, that is already the position in most cases. But as I say, the ruling from the Supreme Court was clear that access to provision should be on the basis of biological sex.
But just what if, and again, I realise that this is a topic that's been talked about, it's a question that's been asked, but it is important. If that third space doesn't exist yet, if there isn't anything other than a male and a female toilet, and you are a trans woman who wants to use the toilet today, which door do you walk through?
You use the service that's available on the basis of biological sex. I appreciate the point that you're asking.
I mean, it's just she just wants a basic answer to the question, really.
Around third spaces or unisex spaces, in many cases those do already exist, including
Where?
in
They
small
don't.
businesses.
They don't
They
in
do.
many places.
Go into your local cafe, a local family cafe. Chances are you'll have one cubicle that's self-contained that can be used by anyone with a
The
wash
disabled
basin
toilet.
inside of it.
Yeah.
No. In many cases, just this one toilet that's to be used by everyone. There are.
Which cafes are you going to, pal? A lot of them don't have toilets, and the ones that do, I don't. They're generally not. I don't know. Maybe I don't go to enough cafes in Sunderland.
Important questions around, for example, the use of toilets, around the use of changing facilities, but there are also profound questions that I think are even more important about, for example, hospital provision, rape crisis centres, women's refuges, where you are talking about.
Is this a big problem currently, though? Before the court ruling, I struggled to hear stories. You think the media would run with stories about trans people causing issues in these kind of places? I've never heard of this stuff. Maybe I'm ignorant on this.
people often being in that provision on an accommodation basis for an extended period of time. And I think it is important and welcome that the Supreme Court have put beyond doubt that providers can make sure that's done on the basis of biological sex, because I do believe it is important that when women have experienced abuse, male violence, that they are able to heal, that they're able to access that, therapeutic support that's required.
They can access, if you want people to have more access to therapy, then you should make that more available via the NHS, but they already do have that at these places as far as I'm aware.
And what they have said consistently, and what campaigners have worked for over many decades, is to ensure that that provision does exist and can be single sex. And the ruling has made that.
So what do you do then if you're a trans person who has an abusive partner or abusive family? What are you supposed to do in that situation then? Is it just, sorry, tough luck, mate, or nothing personal, kid? What are you supposed to say to them in that situation? I don't get it. There's more here.
Politicians who are jumping. I'm a cis woman, and I'm disgusted with the amount of politicians who are jumping on this relentless war against trans people. I want to be really, really clear. Men do not need to disguise themselves as women to abuse us. They already
some men
do that. They already do that.
Yeah.
And I'm going to speak from experience here, okay? Because there is this constant myth that men are disguising themselves as women, and that trans women are actually men trying to access women's spaces to attack them or to harm them or to abuse them. That is not the case.
I would love to see the statistics on this, to be honest with you.
Trans women are women. Men already get a free pass in our country to harm us. It's near impossible to get justice as a woman when you face sexual violence or abuse. And I'm going to speak from experience. I've been groped in broad daylight and had there was no follow-up. The police decided not to prosecute. I was assaulted in my own home by a man. I've been assaulted in clubs by men. When I was at school, I was followed and catcalled as a teenager walking home from school. These are all things that cis women experience all the time. Men do not need to disguise themselves to do that. They already feel entitled to do that, and there is no justice for us. I'm a cis.
Yeah, it's kind of true. Like we're in a situation where certain cases are really impossible to prosecute because the court system in this country is just heavily backlogged.
We made freedom of information requests to every single acute hospital trust, mental and acute medical trust, to ask about complaints against trans women made by other women and hospital wards. And there was one complaint over a 3.5-year period. And if we put that into context, there were 200,000 complaints made in the year to April 2023. In total, and only one of these was about a trans woman, and that was not upheld.
I think it's more it's partly entitlement of a lot of women who see these spaces as their own, but it's also partly, I think, fear of people pretending to be women and entering these spaces and doing damage effectively. But the statistics don't really back that. I get fear is obviously one of them things where you can't talk about statistics that get people out of fear. I mean, like, chances of me being robbed are very low, but I still fear the day someone says "run me your pockets, big man." Do you know what I mean?
And there are over 6 million hospital admissions involving women every single year in this country. So it's just a tiny, tiny, tiny needle in a haystack. It's a fuss about nothing. There is no risk. There was one complaint out of 200,000.
But we don't want to get to an area of risk. Caroline, we don't want to get to an area of risk anyway, do we? Is it not just respect for someone else's feelings?
But what about trans people's respect and dignity and compassion for them?
Why does that trump? But why does that trump the non?
It doesn't trump it, Nick. Everybody's needs can be accommodated. I have to keep repeating, 6 million women are admitted to hospital every year, or 6 million admissions relating to women every year, and over a 3-month period, there was one complaint.
So, the statistics don't really bear out what kind of turfy people are arguing. I think as court rolling, judges typically dinosaurs when it comes to a lot of this stuff. So, again, I'm not too surprised at this court ruling. I think it's where the government really is meant to step in and, change legal definitions and things like that. The fact that Starmer was very pro-trans before and isn't is not a big surprise to me, to be honest. I've seen people like Phil and Graham kind of just, shake their head at this stuff and really not understand it, even though this is a guy who's been in Starmer pandering to kind of the right wingers in the culture war as well, talking about how immigration's too high, being anti-EU to an extent, sort of pro, not being anti-joining the EU, for example, things like that. This is a guy who's very much part of the right wing's culture war in this, and is more than willing to throw people under the bus here. A guy talking about deporting Bengali people and things like that. What did we do to him? Do you know what I mean? Especially when the Bengali community do typically vote Labour. But this is the point I'm making here, which is Labour have always fed into, kind of under Starmer, have always fed into this right-wing culture war. So for them to throw trans people under the bus is not surprising, especially when they've always struggled on this issue. Starmer's always like, when asked about women, is, I don't really care. It's a question he didn't want to answer. Now he's got the court ruling. He's got something to hide behind. But the problem is, it doesn't make the issue go away. It just makes it even worse, even more confusing for people and even more dangerous for trans people as well. And it also cis women, when the inevitable gender check is going to happen when someone says, "I think you're a man," and then you're going to have to, or at that point, I don't know how they're going to figure that bit out. So this is pure cowardice from the man himself attacking a marginalised community. And I think a lot of the pro-Labour people are going to be at wit's end over this stuff. Purely because this is indefensible. Like, some of the stuff he's doing and saying is indefensible, because at the end of the day, with a lot of these people, they weren't really pro-Labour, they were anti-Tories, they were just mad about Brexit, they wanted to kick the Tory party, they wanted the end of the Tory party without really thinking about their replacement, and that's why we're kind of in this mess that we're in. We saw kind of some of the hallmarks of Labour, willing to throw, I think, minorities under the bus really before the election, and so they're going to throw more marginalised communities under the bus in order to kind of appeal to potential reform voters, because they're the ones they fear the most. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And we wait to see which community Starmer throws under the bus next.